All right. Thank you for making it to the stage, Mr. Andrew Yang. We are so excited to have you here today. How are you feeling?
I feel great. It's fantastic to be here. Thank you for having me, and thank you particularly for those of you who rode a bus for hours to be here. Appreciate it so much. You all are the essence of democracy, and we have to use our democracy to improve our own lives as quickly as possible.
Definitely. So this 14-year-old advocate is demanding space for youth involvement when we are having conversations centered around policy. I would like to introduce you to Alisa Alvarado Martinez.
Switch, yeah.
Good afternoon, Andrew Yang. My name is Alisa Martinez Alvarado, and I am a 14-year-old activist. I'm here to speak on youth and democracy and why it is important to me, because I want more youth to know that we are today's leaders and tomorrow's voters. I am not waiting to turn 18 to be a part of the change I want to see in my community. The time is now. My future is at stake. We are standing up for immigrant rights, fighting against climate change, pushing for gun reform, working to put an end to crippling student debt, and getting universal health care for our families. We are leading change. We are organizing our friends, classmates, and families to demand the future we deserve. I want to use my voice to advocate for my community, Latinx and immigrants. Since announcing his candidacy, Trump launched an anti-immigration campaign, causing attacks on Black and brown communities. His administration violates human rights by denying asylum seekers entry into the country. Instead, they're putting people in cages and separating families, causing more trauma in their lives. One of my friends is a DACA recipient. The day that DACA ended, I saw her break down. She told me she felt hopeless. I witnessed how teachers use derogatory language towards DACA recipients, and I was called a dirty Mexican for speaking Spanish to my grandma. This should not be the norm, and this is not the country I want to grow up in. Today, I am here to use my voice for those families that have been torn apart. There was a recent report by ACLU that states that there are more than 1,500 families that were also separated by Trump's inhumane zero-tolerance policy. This brings the total of families torn apart to 5,500 at the very least. Mr. Yang, as president, will you launch an investigation to hold this administration accountable for what they have done to these families and ensure every single one of them is reunited?
Yes, I will. I'm the son of immigrants myself, and I'm also a parent. And seeing families get torn apart, it hurts me, as it should hurt every American, no matter what our background is. So there were a couple of big themes in your question and statement, and I'm going to address the first one because I feel very, very strongly about it, and then the second one, which I also feel very strongly about. So the first one is young people need to have a greater say in what happens in our society. And I am the only presidential candidate in the field that has said we should lower the voting age to 16 immediately. And I'm a very data-driven person. There are many excellent reasons to lower the voting age to 16. Number one, the younger you are the first time you vote, the more likely you are to vote throughout your life. Number two, it would turn every high school into a hotbed of political activity. Number three, you're going to be on this planet longer. I mean, it's sort of common sense, but like honestly, you're going to be here longer. You should have a say. And if you're 16, you pay taxes if you work, so you should be able to vote. The only counter-argument I've heard is that 16-year-olds don't know what's happening around them, and I think that's nonsense. 16-year-olds know plenty of what's going on around them. In some ways, they're more on top of it than a lot of voting-age adults. The other thing is, it's not like we're springing a pop quiz on you when you show up to the ballots. Like, there are a lot of they're actually called low-information voters. You know what I mean? It's not like people who are above 18 are all freaking, like, political investigators. So number one, we have to give young people an actual say. And can you imagine what this country would look like if 16-year-olds could vote? It would be a better country, and I'm determined to make that possible. To the second, which is that Donald Trump has inflamed xenophobic and racist sentiments around the country, it's heartbreaking. And the fact that you've experienced that personally is also heartbreaking. I believe that I can reverse that, in part because of my own story, my own identity. My father grew up on a peanut farm in Asia with no floor. And I'm running for president. And that, to me, is the American story that we have to let people know about, that immigrants make this country stronger, more dynamic, both culturally, economically, societally. This is the American story. And I just want you all to imagine, after I'm president, thanks to you all in 2021, the rest of the world right now is looking at us being like, what the heck is going on with the United States of America with President Trump? And then after I'm president, they'll be like, wow, America turned that around in an awful hurry.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, so this next individual is an environmental justice advocate on the human side of climate change. I'd like to introduce you to Adam Thompson.
Hello, Mr. Yang. My name is Adam Thompson. I've grown up across the street from the Boise River and spent most of my formative years going on walks with my siblings and my parents on the path along the river. And because of where I've grown up, I've adopted a deep love for nature. Today, as a result of that love, I'm an environmental studies student at Boise State University. I've researched the realities of climate change and the fact that we are rapidly moving towards the sixth mass extinction. I cite the IPCC report released back in 2018 stating that the world only had 12 years back then to reduce the total carbon emissions to get the planet cool enough before climate change becomes irreversible.
All true.
If we don't immediately act on this climate crisis, there's no future for any of us. The Green New Deal seeks to achieve zero greenhouse gas emissions, clean air and water, advance racial justice, and create millions of green jobs by 2030. Bottom line, the Green New Deal lines up with the timing demanded by science and justice. I really like your motto, make America think harder. And I want to think harder with you. I was lucky enough to grow up in a place with clean air and water, only walking distance away from a beautiful natural landscape. But this is not the case for most people. Climate impacts and environmental racism are already disproportionately impacting people of color and poor folks in this country and around the world. Climate change affects all of us, but it doesn't affect all of us equally.
Yes.
Investment in protecting and preparing vulnerable communities needs to be at the center of any real climate action plan.
Yep.
So, Mr. Yang, if you were elected president, how specifically will you commit resources for people of color and working class folks to not just survive this climate crisis, but have a real stake in the future of the clean energy economy?
What was your name again?
Adam.
Adam. Thank you, Adam. Everything you just said is 100% true. I think most people here know this. When there's a natural disaster, who suffers the most? Poor people, people of color, and that's true throughout, pretty much independent of the type of disaster we're talking about. So my flagship proposal, the Freedom Dividend, which was championed by Martin Luther King in the 1960s, is to have every American adult receive $1,000 a month, free and clear. This would have higher impact on communities of color and poorer communities that right now don't have the resources to protect themselves. Like a flood comes, you don't have a car to get into to drive away to higher ground. If everyone had an additional $12,000 a year, then everyone would be able to at least have some basics. But that's just the beginning of it. My plan, it's literally called Move People to Higher Ground, is phase 4. We should be investing tens, hundreds of billions of dollars in protecting our communities and making them more resilient to the ravages of climate change. Because it's real. July was the warmest month in human history. The last 4 years have been the 4 warmest years in recorded history. We need to make dramatic moves, and we need to make them right now.
Thank you so much. All right, so this next advocate, she fights for immigrants and asylum-seeking communities, Samaya Ofene.
Hello, Andrew Yang. My name is Samuel Finnett. I'm 17. I'm a senior in IB at Valley High School. I come from a family of Somali refugees, and I'm first generation here in the United States. I actually grew up here in East Las Vegas, so welcome to my home. Okay. So, however, like many first generation children from refugee families, my mom still had to file paperwork for me, and I still had to apply for asylum here in the U.S. despite being born here. Okay.
That's not right.
Yeah. So,
She looks American to me. What do you all think?
Going through the asylum process and helping other members of my community go through the asylum process as well, I've watched adults that I look up to and look forward to for security break down to anxiety attacks, suffer from PTSD and depression, and eventually succumb to some of them myself. I also watched some of the children that I grew up with and were raised with have to move back to their home countries that they knew nothing about because they were at high risk of gang violence, and it was the closest immediate source of protection that they could find. Okay. Now, families from Somalia and many other war-torn and political and unstable countries are unable to apply for asylum here in the United States because of the travel ban, despite the huge role the U.S. plays in the political turmoil in those countries. Yemen, another country that my family calls home, is a perfect example of this. Today, I'm here to use my privilege and speak up and fight for the people who cannot speak up and fight for themselves. Earlier on in your presidency, you said that you will repeal the travel ban. But what efforts will you make to ensure that families are reunited, that the families who were waiting for years, some even decades, for entry into the United States, who were denied last minute because of the travel ban, receive justice and are finally let in, and to give the desperate and help these families that desperately need assistance, not just physical and home assistance, but the mental assistance they need as well throughout the asylum-seeking and resettlement process.
Thank you for sharing that story. The travel ban is so infuriating and disgusting because it has nothing to do with making us safer. It's just about inflaming hostility towards certain groups of people. And I would reverse it day one. But I agree with you that you can't stop there. You have to try and undo the damage that has been done. So I would commit to helping reunify families that have been separated because some people weren't able to gain asylum through our processes. And the truth of it is that we have an almost irresponsible approach to asylum right now. We have a policy on the book saying, hey, you can apply for asylum if you're fleeing persecution. But then we literally have over a year backlog. And when people are gummed up in a system that in some cases ends up putting them into criminally inhumane environments. And so if you have an asylum policy, then you need to actually have the resource in place to have asylum hearings and make determinations in a reasonable time frame, and you don't have families trapped in limbo, separated from each other for years on end. I would commit to actually having our policies live up to our values in terms of how we implement them. And the mental health crisis you're describing, unfortunately, it's not unique to refugee families. We have a mental health crisis in this country across the board. Suicides and drug overdoses are now at record levels in this country. It's gotten so bad that our life expectancy has declined for 3 years in a row because of deaths of despair. So as president, I would destigmatize mental health issues across the board and invest in a mental health infrastructure to make us all stronger, particularly young people and those in marginalized communities.
Thank you. Yes. So our next speaker is a UNLV alum, Go Rebels, and Black Lives Matter advocate, Jameelah Lewis.
We have a lot of friends out there.
And just making sure the mic works. Hi, Mr. Yang. It's a pleasure to meet you. My name is Jameelah Lewis. If you don't know who I am, you will soon. I go by she, her pronouns, and I'm an organizer with PLAN and UNLV's Black Lives Matter. So I like to identify as a community resource rather than an advocate. I like to be there for the people. Being born and raised here in Nevada, I've seen what progress looks like in our community, but I've also seen what loss looks like and how it feels. In 1996, I was born 6 days after my best friend, Lineasia Dupree. She was an amazing person. She was a great friend, a daughter, a sister, and she was a fighter. She was everything I aspired to be. But in 2010, about 10 years ago, she lost her life. It was a week after 4th of July. That'd be the last time I spoke with her and had communication with her. She went to a teen club in Sacramento, was supposed to be having a great time, getting turned, living her best life, but that's not how the night ended. While clubbing and having fun on what would be her last day and the last time we spoke, there was a scuffle outside between two rivals. what happened outside would change the lives of people in Nevada, but also in California. Within moments of when people assumed the chaos was over, shots were fired and 2 people were shot. One of them was my best friend, Linasia. It was about 9 o'clock on July 11th when I got the call that she'd been shot. And it was about 11 p.m. when I was told that she had passed away. Excuse me. On July 11th, I lost my best friend, but the person who shot her also lost his life. He lost the access to talk to his family, his friends, and his daughter. And it was all because of the decision to shoot. With that being said, people, especially people of color, live through this kind of gun violence regularly. And you have acknowledged that you support universal background checks. But many of us here know that background checks are only a piece of the problem that have been brought to mainstream due to mass shootings. But what I want to know is, what do you think the root cause of gun violence is, that the kind that killed my best friend? And how would you go about working with legislators and communities to solve this as president?
Thank you. Thank you for sharing, Jamila. Thank you. Thank you very much. The most immediate cause of gun violence is guns. So we need to do all we can to get guns out of the hands of Americans who will do others harm. I'm for not just universal background checks, but red flag laws, a ban on sales of automatic weapons, and these weapons that can kill many Americans in short periods of time. I agree with you, though, Jameelah, and it's so profound the way you talked about how the shooter's life was ruined as well. That to me, there's this whole chain of events that leads to gun violence. And we need to break the stranglehold of the NRA and have common sense gun laws that we can all agree with. But we also need to go deeper into our communities and figure out what the whole chain of events that led to violence is, because getting the gun and using it are the last 2 steps. So what are like the earlier steps? It's poverty in our communities. It's what's going on in our families. It's what's going on in our schools. It's a mental health crisis. It's an economy that people feel like does not have a path forward for many people, young men in particular. We have to be honest that 96% plus of the shooters we're talking about are boys and men. And right now our society does not have mechanisms in place. I'm the parent of 2 young boys, one of whom is autistic. And you can see very clearly that the wrong boy in the wrong school can lead to terrible results. And sometimes those results end up being self-destructive or even externally destructive. So we have to get the guns, yes, but we have to get into our families and our schools and our communities and start making our people more whole and strong, young boys in particular, because they're the ones who are slipping through the cracks and are most likely to use guns. I will also say that almost 2/3 of gun deaths are suicides. So this is not necessarily just, like you said, like the shooter's life gets ruined like most often of all because they make irreversible, tragic decisions that there's no coming back from.
Thank you. So this next change agent is 17-year-old advocate Abigail Herrera.
Good evening, Mr. Yang. My name is Abigail Herrera. I'm a senior at Southeast Korean Technical Academy. I am 17 years old, and I will be a first-time voter this upcoming presidential election year 2020.
Do you know who you're voting for yet?
So
Pressure's on now.
I am an intern at Chispa, Nevada, a branch of League of Conservation Voters. Chispa, Nevada's goal is to make sure that communities of color and low-income families have a strong voice in the decisions and policies impacting our communities and the environment that we all depend on. We're calling on our future president to take strong and immediate action to address the climate crisis, including transitioning to 100% clean and renewable energy. The people's health and safety should be a priority to our president. My question to you is, given that Nevada doesn't even generate nuclear energy and Nevadans overwhelmingly support clean and renewable energy, why do you support dumping nuclear energy or nuclear waste at the Yuka Mountains only 100 miles from here, exposing our communities to nuclear waste?
I couldn't agree more that this should not be a Nevada problem. This is a United States problem. That to the extent our country right now has nuclear power plants that are producing waste, we need to have a national solution that doesn't put the burden on any one community. I couldn't agree with you more that we're in the midst of this climate crisis. We need to move towards renewable source of energy as quickly as possible. And to the extent that solar and wind can support our society in the right time frame, then that is what we should invest in. So certainly, like the fact you framed it as like I'm somehow for like nuclear waste. Like no one is for dumping nuclear waste anywhere. It's like the plan has to be to try and have what's a national responsibility, find a national solution, and not say this is a Nevada problem or Las Vegas problem or Yucca Mountain problem.
All right, thank you. So our final question, and our speaker is going to be in regards to housing. We actually have a couple of red flags up. All right. So the people from Nevada want to get more into details because it is a Nevada problem. And before it gets here, it's going to hit a lot of other communities. So what other plans do you have to make us feel secure if you become our president?
Right now in this country, everything revolves around the almighty dollar. And so when you look up and you say there are communities of color that feel like they don't have a voice, a lot of it is because our market right now is dominated by big companies that pull the strings on everything. And so this includes something like the nuclear, like the placement of nuclear waste, where there were 3 sites that were being considered. One in Nevada, one in Texas, and then one in New Mexico, I believe. Now the question is, how was the decision made for it to wind up in Nevada? And then who are the Nevada stakeholders who signed off on that? So that to me is the question. There are some people, and this is an issue that obviously has existed for years. The question is, how do we actually find a solution that will work for you all and for the fact that there's this waste that exists, that's not originated here, but is originated around the country. I don't have like an honest answer because it's like, I don't have like a terrific answer because to me, this is a problem that we as a country have to come together and face. The fact that you're bearing the brunt of it is, I agree, not appropriate.
So if we were willing to connect you with more Nevadans and people who are going to be impacted by this afterwards, would you be willing to sit down and have a conversation in the future?
Oh yeah, 100%.
Okay. All right, so another crisis that we have in our valley is affordable housing, which is driving our homelessness rate, right? So this next advocate we have speaking is Sandra, and she's going to be translated by Tabitha.
Yes. Buenas tardes, señor Jan. Mi nombre es Sandra Obando, y yo vengo de la ciudad de Los Ángeles, California. He sido líder.
Good afternoon, Mr. Yang. My name is Sandra Obando, and I come from Los Angeles.
He sido líder en la ciudad de Los Ángeles por 40 años. En la vivienda pública, defiendo los derechos de los residentes.
I've been a community leader and advocate for 40 years in public housing, defending the rights of public housing tenants. Estamos luchando por los derechos de los residentes en la vivienda pública. Estamos luchando por una garantía nacional en la vivienda. So we're fighting for the rights of public housing residents, and we are fighting for a national homes guarantee.
Actualmente estoy en la organización como representante ahorita de Grand Game.
I'm here today on behalf of Ground Game LA.
Le voy a pasar el...
Mi nombre es Ana. Después de escuchar la historia de la señora Obanda, señor Yang, ¿qué garantía nos ofrece usted de conservar nuestra vivienda pública al darnos voucher de sección 8?
So this is Anna. After hearing Sandra speak, Mr. Yang, what guarantee can you give us that we will be able to keep our public housing while with your plan to use Section 8 vouchers?
Is that the question?
Nosotros tenemos la experiencia que este programa no funciona y no funcionará. No es una solución definitiva. Ya no queremos más familias viviendo en las calles con sus niños.
In our experience, this is not a program that has worked, and it is not a program that will work, and therefore it is not an effective solution. We don't want more families on the street with their kids.
There are three things that are making us miserable in America right now: housing, education, and healthcare, where they just all keep getting more and more expensive, even though our wages stay essentially the same. And I agree with you that existing responses to public housing in terms of the vouchers, you know that there's like a multi-year long wait list oftentimes, that the programs aren't responsive to changes in circumstance, that you end up with families on the street. My flagship proposal is to put $1,000 a month into the hands of every single American, which is going to be a game changer on the housing level for everybody. Now, it also helps address the homelessness crisis in this country right now, where when you find a homeless person, you know what the nonprofit does or the agency does, the first thing? What they do is they try and figure out whether there are any government programs that this person actually can receive revenue from. So if everyone's entitled to $1,000 a month, then all of a sudden, we all have the power to make sure that there's housing that actually provides for our needs in the community in a way that's not top down, but it's bottom up. Because if you have 2 adults in a household that's $24,000 a year, all of a sudden your ability to find housing for your family will get much, much higher. I'm for affordable housing solutions from the top down and the bottom up, but I don't think top down solutions work individually.
The question's really about the guarantee to keep a public housing, allow people to continue living in public housing. And getting $1,000 a month isn't guaranteeing someone that they're going to be able to stay in public housing. Right now, there's a huge issue between the private sector and the public sector in housing. And a huge part as to why Section 8 vouchers don't work is because it pushes people into the private sector of housing.
I apologize for misunderstanding the question. If you're in public housing, you should know that that home is yours and that nothing is going to happen to you. 100%. I agree with that. 100%. And to the extent that that's happening to people, it's unconscionable. Your home is yours. You're in public housing. Just because some rich developer thinks they can make more money does not mean that you should lose your home.
So that's a really great question. So even if we were to have a $1,000 voucher, what happens when rent goes up?
Well, first, it's not a $1,000 voucher. It's $1,000 in cash. And you can do whatever you'd like with that cash. And to the extent, if your landlord decides to stick it to you, then 2 things. Number one, you can always say, look, maybe I can find a landlord that's not going to try and gouge me. But number 2, if all of the landlords try and gouge you, then 3 or 4 of you get together and you say, you know what, 4 of us, that's $4,000 a month. That's enough for us to get a fixer-upper and start being much more flexible in the way that you can actually not get exploited by the landlords. Because right now, again, the landlords do have way too much power, and the way to balance it out is just to put buying power into our hands.
All right, thank you. And also in our state, it's important to be mindful that even if we all came together with our $4,000, multiple families living in one home is still a form of homelessness because we all don't have access to rooms. But I want to say thank you to all of our youth and everybody that stood here today and shared their amazing stories. And thank you so much, Andrew Yang. We are very thankful that you are here with us today. We would like to hear closing remarks because we do know that you say that you're not a politician. And what Nevadans need is not another non-politician. We need an advocate in office. So we would like to know, what are your closing remarks for a room full of organizers?
Oh, thank you for this opportunity. I appreciate it so much. Before this, I ran a nonprofit that I ran for 7 years. And I was talking to the executive director of a nonprofit backstage, where I know what executive directors do. I know what advocates do. I've If you run a nonprofit, you know that you have to hustle, hustle, hustle with a smile on your face all the time. And then anytime someone does something good for you, you have to like take it to heart and hold it very, very deeply. Because for everyone who does something to help your organization, there'll be 10 people that just ignore you or pretend to help you or say they're going to do something and don't do it. I have been there. I understand. The fact is, it's harder and harder to advocate for the causes we care about because the things we care most deeply about, community, volunteerism, parenting, journalism, the arts, culture, women, marginalized communities, are all getting zeroed out in America right now. They are. And Nevada is going to be ground zero for it, because Nevada has the highest proportion of jobs that are subject to automation and technology in the entire country. Your industries are retail, hospitality, gaming, call centers, transportation, warehousing and fulfillment. All of this is going to get blasted away by robots in the next 10 to 20 years. You are number one in the country. You have to make a case for an economy that works for us as quickly as possible. If you fail in this, then the rest of the country will follow suit in a way that's going to make what happens here an emblem for what happens in the future, but not in the way you want, in a negative way. And we have to keep that from happening. That's why I'm running for president, and I hope you will help me rewrite the rules of this economy to work for you, to work for us, to work for the parents, the children, the marginalized people of this country. That is why I'm running for president.
Thank you, Mr. Yang. All right, let's give a round of applause to our amazing speakers and our community members.
Put the money in our hands. Put the money in our hands. Put the money in our hands. Can we afford it? Yes. Will it cause inflation? No. Is it awesome? Yes. Is anyone trying to make it happen? Yeah, that guy.